Within the last 2 weeks, the media has reached a fever pitch in its coverage of President Trump. Not content to merely portray him as a racist and a white supremacist, some in big media are deeming him a conspiracy theorist after the president retweeted a rather humorous tweet from comedian Terrence K. questioning how convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein, who had plenty of documentation on some political and business elites, including Bill Clinton, could die from suicide. While this could be easily dismissed as the media picking on President Trump, it points to a much deeper handling of the media's rather shallow reporting of conspiracy. We'll talk about that today on this episode of Analysis Behind the News, where we provide the perspective that you can use to help save American liberty and independence. CNN seized upon this retweet to conclude that Trump thinks the Clintons had something to do with Epstein's death. Now, whether Trump really believes that or not hasn't been made known, but the anchor as well as the author of an accompanying online article has gone through and states a litany of what they believe to be conspiracy theories that Trump has promoted. Ana Cabrera, the CNN anchor, goes through the list and provides her reasoning for why each is false. We've heard about these before, including the arguments that President Obama, as well as rival presidential candidates, were not eligible to be president based upon where they were actually born. That Ted Cruz's father had something to do with the JFK assassination, and the 2016 elections were rigged against Trump, that millions illegally voted for Hillary, and on and on and on. But in the online article, they touched upon two that were barely mentioned, including, one, the U.S. government spied on Donald Trump's campaign, and two, there's a deep state of bureaucrats organized against him. Well, let's tackle those two, shall we? Regarding the government spying on him, the anchor clearly and flatly stated that the government did not do so. Yet, former NSA and CIA contractor Dennis Montgomery can demonstrate that the government did before Trump became a presidential candidate. Again, before he became a presidential candidate. TheNewAmerican.com reported online that spy agencies were engaged for years in systematic illegal surveillance on prominent Americans, including the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, other justices, 156 judges, prominent businessmen such as Donald Trump. Again, this comes from NSA and CIA contractor Dennis Montgomery, the former, who gives us this type of information in thenewamerican.com. So, why would we think that the government stopped spying on Donald Trump when he became a presidential candidate? Second, regarding a deep state of bureaucrats organized against him, CNN conveniently ignores the New York Times op-ed that came from a member of the deep state bureaucracy with the headline, "I am part of the resistance inside the Trump administration." Seems pretty clear-cut to me. How about you? And then there are others in the media that take seriously conspiracy theories about Trump and give them ample airtime, including Brian Williams from MSNBC. Last week, he had on a former FBI employee that claims he has found a hidden Nazi message in the White House statement on lowering the American flag until August 8th in honor of those who died in the mass shootings. Frank Figliosi based his entire argument on the date that the flags are to be kept lowered. He says that August 8th is the date 8/8. He says that the 8th letter of the alphabet is H, so one could interpret that as HH, which he claims obviously stands for Heil Hitler in the neo-Nazi movement, I guess. Now, the amount of mental gymnastics that one has to go through to see this is no small feat. Yet, Brian Williams did not take the guest to task for it. He has merely accepted it as if though it were gospel. And that brings up a discussion regarding the role of journalists. Now, CEO of the John Birch Society, Arthur Thompson, wrote a book that we published last year called In the Shadows of the Deep State, A Century of Council on Foreign Relations Scheming for World Government. In chapter 21, if I can find it here really quickly, it is called The Media Protecting the Deep State. And in this chapter, Mr. Thompson states that most major networks no longer report the news and leave it to the listeners to make their own evaluation. Instead, they comment on it, and then they bring in their own experts to tell you how to think about the news. To give you a little history on how this has come to be, let me read just a little bit from Mr. Thompson's book. Several years ago, he writes, it was exposed that part of the U.S. intelligence community, the CIA, had established a program to influence American media in the 1950s. In other words, this began very shortly after the CIA was formed. It funded student and cultural organizations and magazines as front organizations. It was known as Operation Mockingbird, and its principal operative was Cord Meyer, a member of the Council on Foreign Relations. By 1953, Allen Dulles, a founder of the Council on Foreign Relations, oversaw this media network. After its exposure around the time of the George H.W. Bush administration, supposedly the Operation Mockingbird, went out of existence. However, there are those who question whether the CIA is still involved in influencing the media or even elections. To illustrate the thinking of a typical CFR member in the media and government, we can look to Richard Stengel. Stengel was a former undersecretary for public diplomacy and public affairs under President Obama and served as managing editor of Time magazine. At a forum hosted by the CFR called Political Disruptions, Combating Disinformation and Fake News on April 20th, 2018, Stengel said this: basically, every country creates their own narrative story, and my old job at the State Department was what people used to joke as the chief propagandist job. We haven't talked about propaganda. Propaganda, I'm not against propaganda. Every country does it, and they have to do it to their own population, and I don't necessarily think that it's that awful. Again, that's from Richard Stengel from Political Disruptions, Combating Disinformation and Fake News, which is a forum hosted by the CFR back on April 20th, 2018. Those are his words. Mr. Thompson concludes in all of this that in a free country, the government should not propagandize their people. This is contrary to the idea of the people being sovereign, not the government. We, the people, begins the Constitution, the basic law of our country. If the government propagandizes the people, particularly in league with CFR-influenced media, the people are handicapped from being able to make independent decisions at the ballot box and are no longer free, in the true sense of the word. For many years, the CFR has been very influential in the media through its members owning outlets, producing the news in part or on air, or sitting in the chair in front of the camera. Such personalities bracket all news outlets, both liberal and conservative. So when it comes to reporting on true conspiracy theories, we certainly cannot count on the big media to be fair, balanced, and independent. As far as knowing what really happened to Epstein, or even JFK for that matter, good luck. But for knowing about the deliberate conspiracy about the deep state and other elite groups and individuals working on shedding American liberty and independence by moving America into world government, well, you can count on the John Birch Society to give you solid, truthful information that we ask you to verify for yourself. It's been recently pointed out by our detractors that our organization is the spearhead of a powerful movement. It's the movement to restore American freedom to all Americans and to protect the system our founders gave us so future generations can also enjoy its benefits. If you feel the same, apply for membership today in the John Birch Society and let's work together on less government, more responsibility, and with God's help, a better world. We ask that you check the links for shortcuts to the Join page, as well as how you can purchase Mr. Thompson's book in both print or Kindle versions. And please, be sure to like and share this video, as well as subscribe. Until next time, we'll see you then.